¿Y este es el que se ha escapado? ¿Ves? Este era el que estaba en la cápsula, que se salvó y estaba haciendo una entrevista con esa señora. ¿Eso es real? Desde KQDB en Minneapolis, Aire Libre es el premiado programa de entrevistas que brinda reveladoras conversaciones con iluminadas personalidades de las artes y literatura, negocios y política, ciencia y tecnología, deportes y entretenimiento. Conducido por Emily Kaler, el programa semanal es uno de los más duraderos y populares de la radio pública nacional. ¿Será real alguna parte de esto?
From KQDB in Minneapolis, I'm Emily Kaler. This is Open Air. The Oceanova project captured the global imagination when announced in 2016. 3 years later, a small crew of miners and researchers made their home more than 1,000 miles from shore, 2 miles beneath the
Eso lo
sea.
podéis leer porque es la historia de
On
lo que
February
pasó,
2nd of last year,
básicamente.
the $2 billion installation was battered by shock waves resulting from an undersea earthquake. My guest, Kip Mattis, was on site as an engineer when the habitat, Compass 1, began to take on water. He escaped with 2 colleagues, eventually finding himself alone on the seafloor in a high-tech dive suit. He endured 6 terrifying hours before reaching the surface and rescue.
6 horas.
He was the sole survivor. His account of that day, Hell or High Water, was released last week to critical acclaim. Our reviewer calls it a haunting and poignant high point in the tradition of timeless, true-life survival stories. Kip Mattis, welcome to Open Air.
Hello, Emily. Thank you for having me.
There are so many incredible moments in the book, but it's hard to put those in perspective without setting the scene. So before we begin, could you talk a little about Oceanova and what it meant to you?
Oceanova was once in a lifetime. They're breaking new ground, making something meaningful. Mining methane hydrate frozen beneath the seabed. There's alternatives, but none so plentiful. It's clean and safe. I couldn't say no.
Okay, before we go any deeper, I'd like you to help me set the scene. Can you walk us through what happened, how it all began?
Sure. I guess I'll start at the beginning. 10:02, February 2nd. We were 50 miles from the epicenter. But an 8 on the Richter scale makes that kind of distance irrelevant. The shockwaves hit 6 minutes later, striking the south face of the HAB first and hardest. 27 minutes in, with that kind of concussive force, even the sealed modules were compromised. After that came the ocean. By 10:33, only safe havens in a sub or one of the suits.
There's a passage where you describe turning inward for guidance, and it feels important. Would you mind reading that for us?
Check your gear, trust your training. It's one of the first things you learn. But the second they fail, you fall back on what you know best. For me, it's the list. This time, it wrote itself. Keep breathing, find others, and get the hell out.
That's Kip Mattis reading from Hell or High Water. Now, I think it's safe to say that this book, your experience, is, well, it's about pressure, isn't it?
When it's all bearing down on so many levels, it's got to be managed. You can't shake the pressure. Just make your peace with it. Don't let it take the wheel.
There were 2 habitats, one of which was Compass 1, your home, but it was also an established rendezvous point in case of emergencies. Was there any precedent you could look to for guidance?
Yes. I mean, there's protocol for everything. Has to be. Second guessing puts lives at risk, so it's best to stick to procedure, step by step. So with an all-hands call, you head straight for Compass 1. Try and reach surface from comms.
Do you remember a certain point where the scales tipped? Where you're like, okay, this is even worse than I thought?
I think it was hardest when I eventually got back to Compass 2. I mean, you're holding out for hope that someone else had survived. And from the outside, the structure seemed intact. So I figured whoever's inside might, well, maybe it's okay. We ran all kinds of drills, and you believe you know what to expect. But once I got inside, where it's familiar and you should feel safe, even though I had to, those first few steps weren't easy.
Pues eso, aquí están contando la historia de lo que ha pasado en el juego. Vale, y el que está hablando es ese, Kid Matas, que es el que vimos en el transporte. Entonces ahora está contando la historia de cómo pasó todo, ahora desde su punto de vista. Entonces lo que voy a hacer ahora va a ser poner las 3 partes restantes y entonces lo que estén viendo ahora el episodio, que no sea en el directo, podrán pararlo y leerlo como ellos prefieran. Pero en esta cinta van a contar más sobre la historia. Como resumen, lo que ha pasado es que hubo un terremoto ahí en las profundidades y ellos estaban lejos, estaban como a 50 kilómetros o 60 del epicentro. Pero dice que en esas profundidades está igual. Estar a esa distancia es como estar prácticamente a su lado, porque era un terremoto de escala 8, o sea, de magnitud 8 en la escala de Richter, o como se diga. Y entonces la onda expansiva fue lo que prácticamente destrozó el primer módulo después de los 6 minutos de que sucediera el terremoto. Y 27 minutos después fue cuando la onda expansiva llegó hasta el segundo módulo. ¿Va a haber directo más tarde? No, si este es el segundo que hago hoy. Y eso, vamos a ir ahora por el segundo. Y bueno, voy a ir pasando el texto para que lo vayáis leyendo. Y los que sepan inglés, pues que lo escuchen.
So as you said, after the earthquake, you didn't have any way of making contact with the surface.
Well, I mean, it's hard to describe the state of devastation. And I tried in the book, but yeah, reaching the surface was off the table, physically or otherwise. So it's simple. Hitch a sub to Compass 2 and hope others did the same.
Which you did after a pretty incredible ordeal. And we're jumping ahead a little, but when you got there, things were different. Can you talk about that?
Normally, the habs are lit up top to bottom all the time. A lot of the gear was waterproof. Some of the lights and monitors were still running. So it wasn't dark, but it's fading. Like the whole thing's on life support.
We now know that at least a few others survived the initial destruction. Some managed to get themselves into dive suits, like yours, and tried to do just that. None of them survived, though, which seems to underscore the fact that, even with a clear course, the pressure can still get to you. And I guess that being down there for months, how can it not?
Yeah. It's relentless. I mean, the isolation is unnatural. Little problems start to spiral. Any baggage you don't check at the surface comes unpacked pretty quick. Some find ways to cope, others struggle.
How do you mean?
Well, time kind of stops, right? And watching life go by inside the bubble is cruel. The ones that care get a head start learning to live without you. So the grief comes first, whether or not you're really gone, which feels like they already let you go.
You had to confront loss on an entirely different level. That's evident when you write about finding one of your colleagues for the first time. Dr. Pahlavi?
Yeah, that's right.
Was that the first time?
No, not exactly. No. I mean, I've seen death before, but not like this. Up here, the impact's usually more abstract. This is intimate. It's like when you pass an accident on the freeway. All the possibilities run wild. But then a song you like comes on, or your exit's coming up, and you've moved on. Back to normal.
What's it like living in a habitat? I mean, there were 20 of you, including scientists and engineers like yourself. Sardines in a tin?
They're planning on 60, 75 once the whole thing's staffed up. So just 20 of us felt hollow. There's not much time for recreation, but the options are there. They did their best to keep us happy.
But not exactly carefree, I guess.
Right. We even had this saying, "In God we trust, everything else gets triple-checked." But so much diligence makes every aspect of daily life heavy. Each task or item, like getting into a suit or going outside, has an equivalent weight. So, for getting cargo or yourself over to Compass 2, the shuttle's the most efficient option, relatively speaking.
The protocols, the lack of sunlight, breathing recycled air. How do you cope with all of that?
Well, they give you shots, and we do these checkups with the surface every 2 weeks. The little things are tough, the stuff you have to live without, as well as the new inconveniences you have to accommodate. They kept the heat up, but the weight and presence of the ocean, you can't shake that. Gets under your nails and gums like your teeth are coming loose. And then at some point it recedes. You might not notice that till you're topside, but it's always there.
You describe this feeling that you had midway through that escape might be impossible, which led to thoughts of suicide. I have to ask, was it something you seriously considered?
I was just being pragmatic. But thankfully, I never had to get serious. But as a last resort, I mean, the prospect of just wandering, wearing myself down, that's pretty grim. So, yeah. So I did. Thought about giving up. With that much time to think about nothing, just about anyone would. Thing is, the suit's designed to keep you safe, even from yourself. Makes it hard to take the easy way out.
It's ironic that the suit, the one thing keeping you safe, it was like your tomb. It successfully kept you inches from death for hours.
That's true. Regulators busted, hemorrhaging air, but I made it. I mean, the ADS is an incredible piece of technology. Mine took a lot of abuse. Tracks all this info about you, heartbeat, oxygen intake, biorhythms, everything but your odds of survival. Still, does it make it better knowing how bad things really are? The suit keeps out what you need to be afraid of. Only the fear's trapped in there with you, and it's thriving. So yeah, maybe you're safe and dry, but inside you're drowning.
More with author and Oceanova survivor Kip Mattis after the break.
Vaya. Pues Samuel, real no fue, ¿vale? O sea, es simplemente una historia, está inventado. Y la foto y todo también es simplemente tomada para el juego. Como pone ahí fecha del aire, es del 2022. O sea, va a ser de aquí a 4 años. Pero no, lo que está contando este hombre es todo lo que hemos escuchado durante el juego. Y eran pedazos de estas conversaciones. Y así estabas a salvo dentro del traje y demás, pero realmente esa era tu tumba. O sea, no tenías otra salida, no podías hacer nada más que o continuar de algún modo hasta que consumieras tu oxígeno, o tomar de algún modo la vía rápida y suicidarte. Pero incluso el traje, según ha dicho el hombre este, no te permitía eso. Así que vamos a la tercera parte.
Welcome back to Open Air. My guest today is Kip Mattis, sole survivor of the Oceanova disaster. He survived 6 breathless hours at the bottom of the sea. Kip, in the beginning, you weren't alone. You had some colleagues, J.B. Castillo and Dr. Cora Vanderoe. They actually started out together. You managed to board a sub and, well, I won't explain it all here, but at one point, you're all headed back to Compass 1 in search of other survivors. And then things go horribly wrong. Now, you were prepared, but what happened next caught you completely off guard. Can we talk about that?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
I was hoping you'd talk about the moment when you realized that the ones you collided with were, in fact, the ones you were trying to save.
It was horrible. I mean, the odds of us finding them in the first place were poor. I sure as hell didn't expect to run into them. I don't know. I mean, I never found out who was in the other half of the wreck. Not alive, anyway.
We were talking about protocol. By your own admission, there are instances where you didn't follow procedure. There's your radio and Cora. Granted, this was unprecedented. But as you said, second-guessing puts lives at risk. Do you think the outcome might have been better if you'd just followed the rules?
Well, it might. But there's no way to know that.
So you're lost and looking for some way out of all of this. And really your only option now is the other habitat, Compass 2. And what's most unsettling to me is you're in this dive suit. You call it a walking coffin. I can't even imagine what that takes.
It takes everything. But when you're losing your strength and your senses, well, like I said, it helps you focus on what little's left.
Even setting that aside, so much about your ordeal is almost beyond most people's comprehension. Were you ready for this? Or were you lucky?
No luck.
You mentioned possibilities. Does a part of you wonder where you'd be if you'd never gone down there in the first place?
Not really. I mean, that kind of thinking won't get you anywhere.
Was there ever any temptation to leave stuff out? Did you worry what people would say? While writing the book, I mean, what happened with you and the others, the conversations you had, the choices you had to make.
Right. I try to address that from the start, and by the end of the book, I hope it's clear. I'm not proud of some of the things I did, but I'm not leaving anything out. I can't.
I've been meaning to ask, how did you get the name Kip?
That's thanks to my old man. My full name is Kipling.
Like the author?
Yeah. Unfortunately.
But your mother was the literary one. They divorced when you were pretty young. Can you talk about that a little?
She was determined to be unhappy. Could never really see how that might affect everyone else. And after my dad took off, she just got worse, colder.
How do you mean?
Well, she's never especially good with people, and that's his job. So after the initial shock wore off, all of a sudden it's all about self-reliance.
You mean like tough love?
Maybe. And it's like she thought the stronger she made me, the earlier she could stop, like worrying about me.
So she was like checked out, absent?
No, not exactly. It's actually kind of the opposite. I mean, it's almost in Dad's absence, she was reminded I was even there in the first place. And it was like, well, okay, soon you'll be old enough to have your heart broken too, and I love you, so now you need to learn to be strong.
Well, that's a good thing, right?
Well, sure, if it's the thought that counts. I mean, the intent was always there, it's just the execution. Here, look. The last day of 3rd grade, we drive down to the dock. She points at her watch, tells me, close your eyes. She puts her hand on my chest, says, 10 seconds. And then I'm falling. I'm gonna drown. I mean, I'm sure of it. She's shouting, not to interfere. 10 seconds later, her hand's on mine, pulling me up. The next day we go again, only now it's 15. I'm up all night watching the clock, trying to count 20 on the dot. I knew so long as I, hold out, 40 seconds, 45, she'd come. And one day she didn't. My first thoughts, maybe I messed up the count. My second thoughts, I'm on my own. I open my eyes and the sun's behind her. But I know that shape, it's familiar. Arms crossed, staring down at me. Anyway, by the time I climb onto the dock, she's already home.
Por eso cuando escuchamos este fragmento durante la partida, no tenía mucho sentido. O sea, no sabíamos de qué narices estaban hablando. Entonces ahora que ya sabemos más o menos la historia de este hombre con su madre, está hablando de su madre. Interesante. Hasta luego, Samuel. Hola, Ludin. No, el directo más largo es uno de 10 horas de Minecraft. Pues vamos a por el último fragmento de esta conversación, donde ya contarán el final de la historia y llegaremos a la conclusión.
Methane is a greenhouse gas, one of the most potent. Other industrial disasters may have been more severe, but Oceanova was groundbreaking, like you said. It could be years before we know all the consequences. We might never understand the ecological impact. It was very expensive, and 19 people died. Like it or not, you're the human face of all this. So what do you say to your critics?
I believe in what we were doing.
But was it worth the cost?
I guess that's one thing that's hard to remember. For anyone who wasn't involved, I mean, is that you all dealt with danger on a daily basis. This was serious work.
Yeah. Inside or out, the work is volatile. There's a lot of try and try again. You spend all this time getting things lined up, and then a pipe cracks and methane smoke's jetting out. Everything stops until it's patched up. Just knocks things off course.
You're an engineer. You're a problem solver. You value logic and precision. You talk a lot about times, distances, values, and yet there were some challenges you couldn't solve.
Numbers are easy. It's people that are complex. Numbers bring things into focus. No gray areas to distract you from getting things into perspective.
Does it get easier answering all the same questions?
Now, people ask all kinds of questions. What they ask says a lot about their character, especially when it comes to casualties.
So what's the response when they do ask about the gory details?
I oblige. See which way they want to take it. I mean, what people don't get is that they don't want me to keep going. Not really. There's only so much blood and guts people can take before they lose their appetite. Everyone has their limits.
You're very candid when describing some circumstances. Times when you felt crippled with fear, coming across the bodies of friends and colleagues.
Yeah.
It's clear you care, but there's an undercurrent of detachment in the way you present some of the more difficult moments. Was that your intention?
No, I've heard that before. I just did my best to paint a clear picture. When it comes to empathy, there's no manual for that.
I have to ask again. Was it luck?
Conditioning. Conditioning and discipline. It's how I got down there in the first place, and that's how I got out. It's about keeping tethered to the task. You don't let yourself forget about the reality around you. You can't.
You saw terrible things. And even if you made it to the surface, you couldn't count on being rescued. I mean, I'd have lost my mind. Did you ever feel like you were losing it just a little?
No. When they found me, I'd been floating on the surface for at least 5 hours. I talked with therapists and trauma experts for months. Said I was hiding the hurt. But it's not true. I made mistakes down there, yes, but did I lose my mind? No. No way.
This entire experience is defined by the fact that you came back alone. Your story started with 20 people, but ends with 1. So when it comes to telling those stories, you're the only one who can.
Yeah. There's a responsibility to get things right. For the record.
Welcome back to Open Air. I'm Emily Kaler. If you're just joining us, my guest is Kip Mattis, sole survivor of the Ocean Nova disaster. His first book, Hell or High Water, is a harrowing account of his ordeal. Earlier, we talked about the life aquatic, escaping the flooded habitat, and being lost on the seafloor inside a half-ton titanium diving suit. Kip, I know this might not be easy, but I'd like to talk about the end. Can you read that for us?
Yeah. The list is getting shorter. The hatch opens with its usual reluctance, flooding the room with light. The pod is there. I'm going home. Tomorrow I'll be the sole survivor. But for now, I'm not alone.
How did you feel when you figured it out?
At that point, and that close, I was running on fear. So when I saw another suit in the room, it's almost too much to process. I couldn't believe that it was... Virgil made it. Just like me. Only I'm locked inside the pod and he's locked out. He's not coming back. And that's on me.
So are you saying that if you did something differently, that Virgil would have lived?
That's right. Until I saw him, fear in his eyes, I thought I was the only one. It was a bad call.
You didn't kill him.
Really? Who did? Bad luck? I'm responsible. Look, I'm up here talking with you, and he's still out there.
Kip, it's been more than a year since all this happened. You wrote a book and told your story. Are you ready to be done?
Yeah. It's time to move on. Get myself working again.
Kip Mattis, thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Thanks for having me, Emily.
Y esa es la historia. Ahí al final, cuando entramos en la sala, él sigue hablando y nos damos cuenta de que quien está contando la historia no somos nosotros que hemos escapado, sino es este señor que está hablando de nosotros. Cuando está encerrado ahí en esa cápsula y nos ve entrar en esa habitación. Y nos quedamos con nuestro abuelo en el fondo del mar. Pues nada, gente, creo que va a ser hasta aquí. Creo que no queda nada más. Nos han quedado estos 4, aunque hemos visto de que habían cadáveres que no se podían leer sus etiquetas, así que no sé muy bien si eran esas personas o nos las hemos dejado en algún sitio. Pero bueno, hemos encontrado a la inmensa mayoría y la verdad que ha estado bastante bien. Si os gustan así los juegos que os den así sustillos y demás, este es un buen juego. Tiene bastantes ¿cómo llamarlo? Es que no me sale la palabra. Sobresaltos. Pero bueno, oye, está bien, te mantiene con la intriga y la historia esa que va contando así como a medias te lleva a pensar durante todo el juego que eres tú, que realmente has escapado y estás contando esta historia. Hasta que al final ves que es diferente. Así que nada, gente. Espero que os haya gustado. Y si es así, ya sabéis cómo hacérmelo saber. Así que nos veremos en el siguiente. Vale. Adiós.